Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our session on the potential for financing nature-based solutions. So, it's apropos that we're having this session today, given that the theme of today is Nature Day. And there's been a lot of talk about nature-based solutions since the morning. So, just to give a background, normally when we think of nature-based solutions, we think of actions that let nature do its magic. And as long as these actions, they address the societal challenges such as food security, climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on, and they come with their environmental and social benefits. For example, like if you were to deal with coastal protection, the traditional way would be to build man-made structures. But now, since the term nature-based solutions came into being, you could just simply plant a tree rather than to build seawalls or dikes. And that's why, despite their great potential, the investment in nature-based solutions is what remains to be limited. Finance to nature-based solution currently stands at $154 billion per year, which is less than half of the $384 billion per year that is needed by 2025, and it's only a third of the investment that is needed by 2030. So that brings me to our discussion here. I'd like to welcome our panel. We have Ms. Louise Baker, who is the Managing Director of the Global Mechanism from the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. We have Mr. Luther Anukuru, who is the Regional Director of Eastern and Southern Africa from the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And I myself, Mr. Khalid Omar, an environmental specialist from Badia, will be moderating the session and will also give some perspectives from the finance side. So now I would like to start with Ms. Louise. Please tell us what UNCCD is doing regarding nature-based solutions from the land perspective, and if you have any ongoing partnerships with financial institutions.
Fantastic, thanks. Hello, everybody. So we were talking earlier on about soil and about the value of soil health. I think for UNCCD, that kind of land and the health and productivity of the soil and land is the perfect nature-based solution. In having the land and soil be healthy, we are putting carbon where we need it, not in the air, in the soil. We are improving mitigation and adaptation. We're managing the water cycle. So in every sense, the kind of health and productivity of the land and soil is front and center of climate resilience, climate mitigation and adaptation. In terms of financing for land, it's a thing, right? It's not an easy sell in the climate space, and it's never been an easy sell in the climate space, but it's getting better as people recognize the value of soil and land for climate mitigation and adaptation. Sort of terrestrial-based solutions could be as much as 30% of mitigation potential. And in most places, the best thing that most communities can do to adapt. We do, however, spend huge amounts of money on land-based activities. So first thing I perhaps put out there would be the taxes, subsidies and incentives we pay into the agricultural sector. Is a massive amount of finance that potentially isn't being used to support nature-based solutions for climate or drought resilience as well as it could be. From UNCCD's side, our process involves target setting. We have a land degradation neutrality target set, which looks at the amount of land a country would want to conserve, to sustainably manage and restore. And then we help countries develop their bankable projects to help actually implement those targets. It's a challenge. There's very few pots of money that are dedicated to land and soil. We go through, there's the Global Environment Facility that has a land focal area. There is GCF, if you can document the climate rationale. Increasingly, there are the multilateral development banks. So we work quite closely with the African Development Bank these days. Each of these processes are quite different. Each of them takes a long time to access those resources. So what we're now doing is really working in partnership with different agencies to help countries and others take their ideas and their project concepts and make them bankable for whichever institution that we go for. So that means first identifying the source of financing that you want to go for, and then working through the process of application. It used to be that we gave everybody the same amount of resources and go, there you go, let's see whether we can help you. Didn't really work. So now what we're really trying to do is respond to need and respond to the bottlenecks on accessing finance. So if you're putting a GCF application in and you need a gender assessment or a feasibility study to help you accelerate that process, we're happy to help on that front and try and push that agenda forward so that the pipeline flows more quickly. So really, for us, the process is have your targets, set your target agency, and then we can help you get through that process as, I'm not going to say painlessly, but as painlessly as possible, and just really encourage that movement. We're also looking at innovative only in our reporting process, we worked out that only about 80%, or only about 20% on average of the money required to do this work comes from external resources. Most of it comes through domestic resources. So there's a real need to be innovative about the financing options that are out there. Few things that we've been working on that may be of interest. We worked with the private sector around the establishment of something called the LDN Fund, which was with Mirova Nataxis, and that was very private sector focused. Governments don't like it because they can't get their hands on it. It's not their money, it's really for the private sector. But it really changes the dynamic if you've got a vibrant value chain that's land-based. So that's one thing. We're working quite a bit on carbon credits. And I would say the carbon credit market, especially in Africa, is a bit like the Wild West. I mean, it's everywhere the Wild West, but it's particularly the Wild West. And I would urge all governments and all stakeholders who are considering carbon credits to really think about what your carbon credits look like. From UNCCD's side, couple of things that we want to sort of put on the table, I think. One is smallholders shouldn't have to pay in advance for the transition work. Yeah, smallholders should not be going into debt in order to be able to do the transition and maybe have the money at the end of the day. And the other piece I think we put on the table is tenure, land tenure, and the ability to control the land that you're investing in. I could actually talk about this for ages. I'm going to stop and hope that I've said something interesting we can talk about later on.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that valuable contribution. So you touched base upon the financial incentives, whether it be taxes or subsidies. And you also talked about a very important issue that is setting targets. So when you have these land degradation neutrality targets, then it makes it easier, to know where you want to get to. And there's also something about how you're working with countries to develop bankable projects. The key word here is bankable, because when we talk about finance, you need to make sure that the project is bankable.
So now conversation, that's a rate of return. So depending if it's private sector, it has to be a rate of return. That can be quite large if it's private sector, smaller if it's an impact fund. I'm going to come back to you in Badea in a minute and see what your rates are. But a lot of the money needs to make a profit before people will invest in you. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, point well taken. So now I'm going to move over to the nature people. What can you tell us about what the IUCN is doing and in developing NBS projects? I mean, how is it different from developing normal development projects like infrastructure projects?
Thank you very much. IUCN has been in this space, the International Union for Conservation of Nature has been in this space for quite a long time. We have been part of the crafting of what is NBS. So actually we spent 10 solid years talking about nature-based solutions right from inception. And it has not been an easy time because we had to make the case for nature-based solutions. So one of the things we're so glad about is the fact that it has been adapted globally. And I think we really celebrate that quite a lot. Now, that's easy said. The reality is that, first and foremost, coming up with a definition of nature-based solutions. Because today, many people think anything green means nature-based solutions. And as IUCN, we are saying no. Nature-based solutions must be well guided. So the first thing was defining what is nature-based solutions. The second thing is coming up with standards. We have been involved in developing the IUCN Global Standards for Nature-Based Solutions. This has got 8 criteria and has a number of indicators. And this must deliver for both people and for nature. So we must be very clear about what are the biodiversity benefits and also what are the real benefits to people. So that guides and provides a framework for which we can actually implement nature-based solutions for anyone who wants to do that. The other level that we are talking about today is the level of where we are deploying nature-based solutions through various programs. And again here, talking very specifically in the context of Africa, you will find that the key challenges we are trying to deal with are drought. And remember that the intensity, the frequency of droughts has greatly changed. The other second thing is floods. Again, we are getting unprecedented levels of flood, both in terms of intensity and also in terms of destruction. And this leads to other secondary issues like food insecurity, water stress, all of those are combined in there. So the design to address those challenges is such that we actually look at what is it for both people and what is it for nature. And the financing for this has probably, there's been lots of innovation. I'm going to the area of innovation. The actual resources that were available for a very long time and until now are grant resources from overseas development assistance. And most of these were used for restoration projects, whether it is forest landscape restoration or water catchment restoration. But the scale is so small to the magnitude of the problem. And so bringing in private sector funding is really what will create transformational change. But that's not easy because private sector funding is looking for return on investment. But the good news is that in all of this that we are working on right now, so IUCN has been involved. Louise just mentioned about the Green Climate Fund. We are accredited the Green Climate Fund. We are accredited to the Global Environmental Facility. And through all of this, we are noticing that we have to put up a case. So we're using grant funding as a catalyst to basically unlock funding from the private sector. And what that means is that private sector, they cannot bring in their resources unless they are sure that there's going to be a return on investment. And there are so many risks. One would always wonder, why is it that funding doesn't actually flow to Africa? And yet that's where the biggest need is. That's what we are continuously saying, this is where the biggest problem is. But why is it not flowing in there? It's just the same as the West Indian Ocean, small island states. They badly need these resources. But why is money not flowing in there? It's because they are seen as risky. And so we use grant funding to support de-risking in order to allow private sector funding in. And we've made some successes in this. For example, the designs we're now doing actually include banks. So we partner with banks, and banks are able to see the case for which they can invest and support to get a return on investment. So that's one. And I would say that the nature-based solutions framed in the right way provides a good basis for private sector to bring in their resources. How is that? The first one is the fact that the scale for the design of most nature-based solutions programs are such that they're large scale. Now, that large scale helps you to get the economies of scale in terms of investments. So if you are doing a restoration program that makes sense, you have to take a whole big landscape. And when you take this whole big landscape, it means that you're actually requiring lots of other resources, but the returns are going to be massive. Whether it is forest restoration programs you're doing or it is water catchment restoration you're doing. So let's take the example of Coca-Cola, a company that depends a lot on water. You can't just do a small catchment restoration for water catchment, a small catchment restoration. You have got to do a whole big water basin, a river basin, if you're going to actually achieve the benefits that are required for both people and for that company to do its business. And so that means that the scale is big, the economies of scale are also there. And then the other bit is the fact that the orientation, it has a long-term orientation, because most of these restoration programs are not a quick fix. They actually take a lot of years. And so that enables business to also have a long-term orientation and have a good perspective on how their returns are going to come in. And so this is the area that is actually unlocking large finance. And we are currently working on what we call the Great Blue Wall, which is looking at the small island states. And you'll notice that what we are noticing is that for a grant funding of about 200 million is able to unlock up to about $1 billion in terms of private sector investment. Of course, there are other instruments that banks, for example, financial institutions can come up with, which include bonds, which include certain types of concessional loans, which could also include debt for nature swaps. So there are other instruments that can come into play to get the amount of resources that are actually required to address the problem at its scale. Let me stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm just going to emphasize on one point, that is the role of the private sector. So both interventions actually touched base upon how the private sector has a lot of potential when it comes to nature-based solutions. And you mentioned something about using grants. So if I understood correctly, like these grants, they build the capacity of such projects? Yeah. And it's interesting to know about the Great Blue Wall. Normally we're used to hearing about the Great Green Wall, so now we're hearing something about the Great Blue Wall. So, okay, now I'm going to give just a perspective from the finance side. So, of course, for example, multilateral development banks, they would be willing to provide grants for nature-based solutions, considering that the concept itself is relatively new, you know, and like if the grants could even cover pilot projects. I could give you just an example, because at Badia we do take part in green financing. And last year in 2022, that we approved a grant to implement the planting of 40,000 mangrove trees in rural Gambia. So there were 2 villages that benefited from that. This year, they scaled up the project to plant 1 million. So if we went from 40,000 to 1 million. And these mangroves, they're a very good example of nature-based solutions, and that they are powerful carbon sinks. And they also help in fighting salt intrusion because, you know, the benefiting communities, they suffered a lot from salt intrusion. So definitely, I think that moving forward, that there will be a lot of potential for financing nature-based solutions. I mean, it's important to start at the level of the grants, and then once these projects are actually, you know, developed, then they could become like large-scale infrastructure projects that would be endorsed by governments. So this takes me to another question. Like the development of NBS projects, would you say that it's the responsibility of the government, the civil society? What would you say?
I think it's probably the responsibility of everybody, government, civil society, and private sector. So I'm coming from the UNCCD, which is a UN convention. So our primary stakeholders are governments. So we mostly work with governments, but the projects that work the best are the ones that have a multi-stakeholder, multi-sector approach, at least from our experience, bringing... So, as we know, most of our projects are coming out of the Ministry of Environment. And in every country, in every part of the world, the Ministry of Environment is the least funded, one of the weakest ministries in every country in the world. And when it has to go up against agriculture and industry and economy, it will lose. So what I think we're trying to do with our kind of approach at the landscape level or multi-country projects is make sure that all of the stakeholders are in the room. Different government ministries, but also different stakeholders. Try to include the private sector right from the beginning. Try to include civil society right from the beginning. So the money, at least for us, is kind of negotiated at sort of 4 governments. But the implementation doesn't have to be done by governments. The money doesn't have to flow through government budgets. And so, yeah, everybody's responsibility. Our particular focus is governments, but it works best when everybody's at the table and everybody is playing their kind of best fit role.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, like, definitely what you would recommend, the government could play maybe a supervisory role, but the civil society would be implementing it, basically, in some cases.
I'm going to question the word supervisory, but I think coordination, yes. And the government's got a policy role to play, right? They've got a normative and policy role that they have to be playing. So we can mobilize as much money as we like, but if they then subsidize and incentivize something and send the market signals to the private sector, yeah, we can be restoring the land here, but if the government subsidizes things that degrades the land on the other side, they're not helping. So I think having government at the table to put the enabling environment for good project implementation in place, access to finance, access to tenure, good policy regulation, and regulation is also really critical.
Yeah, so there's one very important takeaway from this. Like you talked about the Ministry of Environment versus other ministries when it comes to accessing financing for projects. Because I could also tell you from our experience, like normally when we look at the priorities of the countries, particularly in Africa, the priorities are more directed towards roads, schools, hospitals. You know, like you would not see that green projects would be at their priorities. And again, that could be traced back to the issue of capacity or...
So I totally agree. For us, we're in, and this is just relatively recently started, probably the last couple of years. We're now only really organizing meetings when there's 2 ministries who come together. Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Planning, or Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture. So And it's really clear here, actually, that our people who are, and I'm sure that's true for biodiversity as well, don't really know the GEF operational focal point, don't really know their focal point in the Ministry of Finance that deals with the banks, don't really know or can't get to their GCF NDA. And so if they don't know those people and can't speak to those people and can't make the case for nature-based solutions to those people, then the proposals don't go forward to you, and they're not invited to the bilateral discussions with a bank when you come to visit, because you'll go to the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Planning, and it's not as sexy, perhaps, or it's not as easy. You know, if you're a government and you want to put up a new airport, it's shiny and it's got marble in it and it looks very glamorous. A field that's got trees in it, less glamorous. So it's really a lot, and I think that's where civil society has got a really important role to play, that we keep raising the profile of this, not with the Ministry of Environment, because they're already convinced. But we need to be working and have the evidence and collect the evidence, economic benefits, rates of return, impact on the economy evidence, and make that case with the private sector and make that case with the Ministry of Finance and Planning all the time. Lobby them.
Yes. So now, Mr. Luther, would you say that there's the need to have an NBS fund? Because like normally when we talk about climate finance, we know that we have the Green Climate Fund, we have the Adaptation Fund, and now recently negotiators have started talking about a loss and damage fund. So do you think that the need for an NBS fund is there?
Thanks. Maybe just before I answer your question, just to add on the point that Lois was talking about, bringing the whole of society in terms of implementation of these programs, I also want to mention that one part which is extremely important is bringing in local communities to the discussion, because on nature-based solutions, traditional knowledge actually is a very, very big asset. And most of the time we tend to ignore that. That's quite important. The other bit as well is that the intensity of some of the, we are noticing the intensity of some of the disasters right now are such that, especially floods, are such that you need not only natural ecosystems to counter, but you actually do need also modified ecosystems, which means you use both gray and green infrastructure. So the case in point is the velocity of water in some of the, which are driving some of the landslides. Massive landslides just need to be pushed back by actually green infrastructure as you're putting your green infrastructure on the side. So you do need to have, you know, all sorts of technical assistance that is also very highly, very high engineering studies and supporting that. So wider wider society involvement is extremely important for long-lasting solutions. But just to your point on creating a fund, I think that the biggest issue has not necessarily been it is important to create funds, and I think we are seeing this GCF, this GEF, now there was biodiversity fund, there's loss and damage fund. Maybe the funds might continue to increase in terms of numbers, but I think the big issue which is currently at hand is even the money flowing, even from the current funds. Is the money actually getting down? I think the biggest question still is that, or biggest issue is that, even when we hear the big pledges of 11 billion, say to right now the Green Climate Fund, the big question is how much of it is actually getting down, how much of it is trickling down because of the operational realities of managing these funds. So I do think that instead of creating another NBS fund, I don't think it's necessary. I think the key thing is that we need to integrate NBS into the existing funds, and that would be that would be my take on that.
Okay.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on this. Actually, the challenge is coordination, I think. So for example, for us, and what your point about grey infrastructure, for us it's renewable energy. as ridiculous as it sounds, energy, access to energy. We do these things in silos. So we do all the nature stuff and we get lots of money and we restore the land and we're so proud of ourselves. And then the communities have got no energy. So then they can't either refrigerate the project or they can't either process it on site, right? So the new product that's been grown on the restored land and we're all so smug about rots in the fields. So you've got to, the complexity of this is, I think, really where we're at, that it's not a simple nature-based solutions fund. It's embracing the complexity of nature within a whole environment. And then it's getting a kind of really holistic approach to investment that blends climate financing and nature financing and energy financing and infrastructure financing and puts a packet together that actually works for people. And at the moment, we're in such small pieces that we're not really delivering. And the complexity of accessing finance, that's a whole nother story, isn't it? I mean, it's really, and countries can't access that money. Countries get frustrated about accessing that money. And when we put partnerships together of technical agencies, for a really solid, quick-moving proposal, you need 5 different agencies with 5 different sets of expertise to put together a really convincing package of technical expertise to get a proposal developed. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, so that could just be summarized in that there is definitely the need to ease the access to finance when it comes to NBS. So now before I give the floor to the audience, if they have any comments or questions, like what are some messages that you'd like to convey to the negotiators, since now we are approaching the end of the COP when it comes to NBS? I'll start with you, Mr. Luther.
I think the key messages for NBS, I mean, for the negotiators, it's come a long way. Even just having the text included on nature-based solutions. The reason is that there are some controversies around nature-based solutions from a point of understanding and appreciating what it is. For a long time, the big standoff used to be that if nature-based solutions should not be used as an excuse to not actually cut down on fossil fuels, or to actually reduce the level of action that is needed to address climate change, because it does seem like we've got a solution to the problem which is existing. And I think that was the controversy. It was a big debate for a very long time. But we are happy that from Sharm el-Sheikh up till now, there has been a very big uptake of nature-based solutions. It's now on most of the texts. It's all agreed. So I do think that the key message is on the implementation of nature-based solutions. I think that it should really point towards accelerating resources to enable action take place.
Okay, Ms. Louise.
Synergies. Actually doing things in silos is a really bad idea. So even climate done in a silo is a really bad idea. So let's synergies. Biodiversity, land, climate, and development are all part of the same package, and they have to be seen like that. I think that's probably, it's on the agenda now. We shouldn't use car analogies, as I said in the end of the last session, but whilst we've got our foot on the accelerator, let's not take it off. Once the kind of thing is on the agenda, we need to kind of keep this agenda moving. It's no time to kind of relax and be smug. So let's ensure that this really takes off. And this is the solution. So I may be a bit of a cynic. I think potentially over sort of 20, 30 years, technology will come on. I'm positive, but I'm a cynic at the same time. 20, 30 years, I think there's technology that will be developed that will be really contributing to the climate answers, and it's not the end of the world, and we can do this together. Now, the best solutions that we have in most regions of the world, actually all regions of the world, to immediately do something about climate, to mitigate and adapt to climate change, are nature-based solutions, and we have to embrace them now to give ourselves a chance. So it's the immediate action is nature-based. So yeah, sorry, there we go.
Yeah, definitely. So that could basically be put in 2 words, synergy. That's a very common word when we're talking about climate action. And of course, act now, because we don't have 20 or 30 years. We need to act immediately. So now before I conclude, yes, like to get an intervention from the audience. Oh, lots of hands up.
Hi.
Okay, we'll start from the...
Thank you. My name is Susan Payne, and I am the co-founder of Sustainable Planet, which has been very well supported by UNCCD, and we are very grateful for that. But I'm talking now as someone who has a nature-based solution, who's developed this in Sustainable Planet. It's an award-winning company that grows plant protein on non-arable land using very, very little water, very few resources. In fact, it's climate positive. It is a carbon sink. But I'm also a farmer in Africa. I own large commercial farms, so I understand. I actually bought those farms so I could understand what it feels like to be a farmer on the ground in Africa and the kind of support that you can give to all the smallholders and subsistence farmers in your community. And I'm also the founder of a fund that funds women across Africa that are making climate change, building climate change businesses themselves. I can tell you dramatically, right here and now, that getting funding into any of these is very difficult, and it shouldn't be. And the paradox that we face here, and I've got a question at the end of this, but the paradox we face here is that we're at this climate conference and raising awareness, as we should be, and the funding here is massive, but it doesn't reach the private sector. It doesn't reach people like me and many, many others that I come across literally on a daily basis of innovators across this continent, across the African continent, that are starved of small amounts of cash. We're talking $1 to $5 million to begin these initiatives. The one that you referred to at Badia, the mangroves. I think those are really critical. And what we see is very little movement. And it is hugely frustrating for people like me that bootstrap for year after year after year and fund women the best way that I can, using my own money, actually. And I do not get grants. It is impossible to find these grants, almost. So just as a cry for help on behalf of literally thousands of people that I come across on an annual basis, and I'm not exaggerating because I speak at conferences about this very point, the development organizations are not there. Sorry, they're not there. And I love Badia because you are. You are trying to be. And I think it's really important that you are. And if it wasn't for UNCCD, we would not be here on this stand showcasing what we do, although we were invited to speak. I've been invited to speak for Microsoft and others. But it's good to have a platform to raise awareness about what one is doing. And it really is important that we press this. It's critical, and I'm on the African Agricultural Board also, by the way, so I have a very deep knowledge of agriculture in Africa. And I still find that it is very hard to get this done. So my points are this. Grant funding, absolutely fantastic. I think the work, Luther, that you're doing with grant funding and what you said about it is absolutely spot on, absolutely key. But we have to do so much more, and there's no question that nature-based solutions should be part of the whole conversation. To separate that out is frankly fatuous. It is part of the conversation, it's part of the solution, and in fact, it's actually the most important part because it's something that everyone can do at a low level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have more. Okay, so we'll just, sorry, we'll just have to, okay, we'll start here.
Yeah, to be honest, I was almost withdrawing my question when she spoke because it's like she entered into my mind. And what she said is very true. I come from Zambia. My name is Akufuna Muyunda. And what she said, those are real problems on the ground. As I'm speaking to you, hundreds and hundreds of families have gone hungry in Zambia because of a drought that we have experienced recently. And these are mostly women and children and youth, and some of them can't even go to school. And we are here still talking about the bureaucracy, the red tape around climate finance. And to a point, we hear all these big numbers. These days, I even get high blood pressure when I hear billions of and millions of pledges, which I obviously know as a youth advocate that it will never reach my home back there where there's a real problem that needs to be addressed. So I think just to add to our point is also my request We have solutions, many solutions out there. Personally, I'm piloting a project which I call Nature App, which is a solution that I want to use technology, to your point, to bridge indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge to see how we can also be able to document this knowledge itself, because over time it will be passed on and we forget about it. We have a lot of indigenous knowledge, and this issue is very real, and that's why even here in this room, from Zambia, we have our traditional leaders that are here, because the problem is real in their chiefdoms, and they are now coming here personally to come and solicit for support so that we can have this finance reach the grassroots, and that the solutions at grassroots can also be supported in real terms. COP29, when we come, we want to come and tell you a story to say, that lead to $1 million US you gave us, that lead to $5 million US you gave us. We can show you to say, this is the impact it has created in real time at grassroots level. And my chiefs are here, and I cannot lie, and I'm telling you that we need that support. And please, if there's any way you can help us to also build the capacity at local level, please show us where to go so that we can look for that capacity, because all the available financing, they'll ask us technical questions that we can't answer. We have the solutions, but to ask us technical questions that we can't answer. So if that is the gap between us accessing that finance and finding solutions that we are supposed to put on the table, please, why can we find that capacity building so that we can go back home and implement? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I am from Badia, so I will try to campaign for my flag here. Mr. Khalid has been very eloquent explaining what we do. Of course, we are owned by all producing countries and also Arab countries. And as you know, we had different windows that we deploy on that regard. And what we have realized is that there's one word that the president liked to put together is partnership. No African countries, sub-Saharan African country is member or shareholder of Badia, but all the money of Badia goes directly and exclusively to Africa. What does partnership means as we speak now? My friend at the left here explained with a very emotional word that he's unable to tap into existing resources because of technicality and the like. The money today lies in two different perimeters. The first people having money in the world are the private sector. JP Morgan moves $6 trillion a day. And next to them, there's philanthropies or like high net worth people. 1% of the population, you know, from Elon Musk to Jeff Bezos to all of them have enough to live 300 years if they could. So that's where the money is really for those people that can give money without asking a board or anybody, because it's their money. There's no board involved, there's nothing involved, it's their money. So what Badia has tried to do is to design a reforestation fund of 2.5 billion by gathering all those philanthropies together so that they can put their money to use. So that's something in the process. I also heard that we have natural-based solution lie in the tradition. And the president of Badia also tried to explain that there are solutions which are, you know, often without costs, if we may say. In Mauritania, for example, they have the habit to put a little hanger on the neck of the cows, and the more the cow eats some grass, this hanger drops some seeds, which in turns, you know, lead to another plant. So these are easy techniques that doesn't require a business plan or any technicality to be addressed. Now the last one, which is an emotional stance that I want to say on Africa. The situation of African, when you sit with a good and a conscious African finance minister, you really don't want to take that job. Beside the countries where governance has an issue, of course, now there are so many indicators, index, and bodies that rate African governance. So we will say, we will try to choose a country where the governance is okay. A finance minister in Africa now is confronted to things that nobody of his peers in the Western world has been confronted to. First, he has people coming from the IMF of the World Bank to guide the way he collects, to guide the way he spends. Guide the way he collects. He will enact taxes because he has to have minimum 20% tax collection on his budget. So the population will cry, too much tax, but there are guidance behind that. So that's number one. Now, the spending part. Green is a new thing, how to spend on green and energy and these new things. But the spending part also is monitored. When you say that you see infrastructure, you see which are big things, these are things also, when you design your development plan of the year and you present it in London or in Paris or Hamburg, wherever it is, investors have preferences. That's where the money is. So they are obliged to put those things in place. For example, I will give an example which will touch you. Benin, Burkina are among the first African producer of cotton. Cote d'Ivoire is the first world producer of cocoa, right? How do you get the cocoa from the farm gate to the port? You need road. You need to build a road so that the cocoa leave, because there's no recipe in Cote d'Ivoire with cocoa in it. There's no dish. There's no dish in Cote d'Ivoire that you can do with cocoa in it. There's none. So you are pretty much stuck. And number two, the pricing of the cocoa is not done in Africa. So you are producing something which is priced in Chicago or London. But you have to export to do what? To have foreign currency to reimburse your debt. So it's a chicken and egg, and it's a vicious cycle. So most of my finance ministers have gray hair, because how do you start? Where do you start? And when you add to that the various ratings flying around, oh, your country is a C now, your country is B now, or you had a coup, or there is terrorist attack, and this and that, the minister is lost. If he tries to increase taxes, he will be disenlisted by his population. If he stands still, he will have nothing to do. So I think that we need to be very kind and patient, because the motion of Western countries is not the same motion of Africa, because Western countries have developed. There's hospital. When you go to France, there's free hospital, free education, free this, free that, free police. But we in Africa, for 60 years, have not had time, peace to develop all that. So now that we're trying to do those things, there are new things coming up, like the green, okay, don't use your oil reserve, it's bad, okay? Don't use this, it's bad. So what do we do? So there's a dilemma between in the COVID period, Badea gave $100 million for COVID as Arab group, but most African countries who didn't have that kind of grant, how do you get vaccine? In Africa, we have competed to get vaccine. Did they give us vaccine? You have to fight for that. So these are thematics that we should put in a form of hierarchy. And the solution that we have found is that people who have money are the private sector and the philanthropists. So if we spend energy on those people, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk trying now to go to where? To the moon. So people are trying to survive in the Earth, but he has enough to go to the moon. So that's where you should go. That's where we should go. instead of hitting here and there. That's the general comment I want to do by pointing out that Badia is trying with Arab Coordination Group. I think sometime on Sunday you will see the declaration. In COP27, you were there and there were no pledge for loss and damage, but Badia with the Arab Coordination Group back then committed $24 billion to that cause. And they will deploy the same thing sometime in Sunday. So everybody is trying to do its thing, but I will insist on the word partnership and channel the effort on the rich, the philanthropists and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have, the lady behind for the last intervention.
Hello, my name is Esther Nyambura. I am an environmental scientist from Mombasa, Kenya. I work with a community-based organization that deals with mangrove conservation and restoration. So I've heard so much about climate financing, especially when it comes to the government. Kenya has been one of the beneficiaries from the World Bank and all. There are so much funds that come in Kenya when it comes to climate issues and all. But the problem is not in the financing, the problem is in the utilization of these funds. Because, like for instance, there was this fund that was allocated during the Africa Climate Summit, and it was supposed to spearhead local-led initiatives. But this fund do not get to the ground. It really doesn't come to these community-based organizations that are actually the implementers. You see, the government has, they come up with projects, probably for planting a million trees in some areas and all, but that's just it. There's a difference between planting and growing. So the government plants, the organizations grows. But then we do not get the resources. The organization that I'm working with has been there for like 14 years, but we have only managed to restore around 120 hectares, and we want to at least get 400 hectares. You see, like in the mangrove ecosystem, we have like 60% has been degraded so much in Kenya, and we are trying to get these resources into it. And then another thing apart from the finances not getting to the ground is the policies. So as much as these governments are getting funds, how about you also help us in advising them? Because in Kenya, for instance, again, we have, there was a ban on logging that has been there for like 6 years, but now it has been lifted. So you're financing environmental conscious initiatives, but then these policies are still, they're still limiting us. But then again, they said it was for only plantation forests, but all the natural forests have been gazetted as plantation forests. So where is the line between policies that cut our legs when we're trying to implement? We are trying to do these things. The intention is perfect. We want to build this resilience in the ground. We want to build community-led initiatives, but we do not have the power. We do not have the resources, and when we try, we're still being cut down. So, as much as there is finances, please advise our governments as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So just some concluding remarks. There's definitely the need to do two things, to unlock the investment or to further unlock the investment in NBS and to also strengthen the policy framework in nature-based solutions. Thank you very much for coming.
Can I just make one pitch?
Sure.
Because we've heard how fabulous the Arabs are on this. Mm-hmm. Our COP next year will be in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the UNCCD COP. Let's all stay in touch, and I totally agree with you on the private sector and the philanthropy. Very good points. Let's put these on the table and let's see where we are in Riyadh at the end of 2024. Is that okay? Sorry, just a small pitch. Yeah. First 2 weeks of December. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So with that, our session is concluded. We just need to take a photo and then, yeah.